From the very beginning, the goal of PhET was to be the most broadly useful tool. And so we designed it so it could be used by teachers in the classroom as a lecture tool, but then it also could be something that students could go home, work with on their own, be part of their homework problems, or just be used in informal science education. And so from the beginning, we really wanted to make this a technology that could fill as many niches as possible in the educational needs. And I think we succeeded quite well in that if you look at how it's being used. What I think makes PhET unique is it's really based on research on learning, and it embodies the expertise of scientists, science research educators, and very high-level software engineers to make sure we've built that research on learning and tested it very carefully with students so that it really will be effective when used. One of the tremendously powerful things about the PhET interactive simulations is that they are so highly interactive. The students really controlling what's going on and learning from it, not just watching something. And in addition, they make the invisible atoms, light, etc. visible, so they can investigate and discover these things for themselves. It gives them a whole different perspective about science. It's not just then some magical, mysterious thing that you're just cramming to memorize a bunch of facts for. It's something that everyone can really understand, and you can see how it affects your world. It really changes people's whole perceptions of thinking about and learning science. By changing learners' views of science, it also makes a lot more of them realize they can be scientists, they could do science, who otherwise would never be thinking along those lines. You know, this is important across the entire population. I'm particularly concerned with those groups who are quite underrepresented in science right now. When I first started with PhET, I didn't really have nearly the grand vision it's turned into. I just saw lots of opportunities to use these in classes that I was teaching, other people were teaching, that I thought, gee, this would make it a lot easier to understand the material and make it a lot more interesting. It can do a better job of showing students how this relates to the real world around them. I've been amazed to see actually the growth of PhET over the past 10 years, both as it expands into new areas of science, but most importantly, how widely it's being used from college levels now down to grade schools and in countries all over the world.
Welcome back, everyone, for our final panel of today. The topic is Catalyzing Technology for Learning. And I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator for this session, Punya Mishra. He is a professor in Mary Lou Fulton College, and he is also the director of Innovative Learning Futures at ASU's Learning Engineering Institute. So Punya, over to you.
Thank you, Betty. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. It's been a long day. Need some energy here, all right? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
There we go. There's coffee in the back, I think. No, there isn't. Sorry, don't look back. There is no coffee. Coffee is done. Bad call, but that's okay. We will bring energy from here. Thank you again so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Punya Mishra. I'm the director, as Betty said, of Innovative Learning Futures. It's the vaguest title I could come up with so that I can do whatever I feel like, which is great. Thank you, Danielle. It's really my pleasure to be here today with our guests. Before we start, imagine a program that has reached over 300,000 students, children across 8 countries, significantly improving their literacy and numeracy skills. That's the scale of impact achieved by Can't Wait to Learn, led by our first panelist, Marwa Zahr, as the Implementation and Practitioner Lead and 2024 Yidan Prize Laureate. Marwa brings her extensive experience to embed this digital game-based learning in conflict-affected settings worldwide, as you saw in the video. Now, picture hundreds of free interactive math and science simulations translated into 129 languages, used 1.7 billion times globally. This is the reach of the PhET interactive simulations, where Rebecca Vieyra, our second panelist, serves as the Director of Global Initiatives. Founded by Nobel laureate Carl Wayman, who you saw in the video, PhET engages students through intuitive research-based simulations. Rebecca is a former physics teacher with a PhD in science education and leads PhET's international strategy. Welcome to you both. You are not here to listen to me, so I'm going to jump right into our first question. Can we start with you? Marwa, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization, and particularly given this is focused on technology, what role do digital technologies play in your work? And then I'm going to go sit here and not stand here anymore.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, really honored to be among this group of experts and academics. So I'm Marwa Zahr. I'm an educator. This is how I'd like to introduce myself, and this is how my career started as a teacher in the community that I come from in Lebanon, and what motivated me to dive deeper into the field of education. So currently, I'm implementation and practitioner lead with War Child, working on the Can't Wait to Learn program, which is our digital personalized learning program. Briefly, at War Child, we aim at working with the children in the most low resource settings and in conflict affected settings, making sure to provide quality education, psychosocial support, and the protection. And this is where Can't Wait to Learn harnesses this by providing foundational literacy and numeracy to children through a program that's aligned with the curriculum, co-created with the children and communities, and that's rigorously researched. I was supposed to be here with two other laureates, my colleagues, Professor Mark Jordans and Luke Stannard, who couldn't make it. But a shout out to Laura Miller, my colleague in the back, who has been, since we started Can't Wait to Learn with the team, but now with a more strategic role. Laura is with us. Thanks.
Great. All right, good afternoon. I am Rebecca Vieyra, Director of Global Initiatives at PhET. And similarly, I would hope people think of me as an educator. That's how I started as a high school physics teacher. And of course, science teachers in the United States teach a lot of things. So I taught more than just physics, but that's my true love. And I actually encountered PhET for the first time when I was a pre-service teacher at Illinois State University. And for me, it was really transformational to see that I could have access to so many different resources digitally, regardless of the classrooms that I knew I might end up going into. And so I'd use them. We're now talking, well, it meant 20 years, basically. I only taught for 7 years in the classroom directly, but after that, worked with teachers. And so when I came to PhET 3 years ago, I was just thrilled that PhET was able to expand beyond its primary work, which is creating these simulations that you just saw in the video. And beyond that, with the support of the Yidan Prize, we were able to launch global initiatives, which allowed me to work on teacher leadership. So my big goal was to identify all the excellent local expertise that's out there around the world, because there are some exemplary educators anywhere you go, right? And so what we were able to do is to build up communities of teachers, support them with pedagogical practices. And I loved hearing all of today's speakers, because I think there's so much synergy between what we're trying to do and what you're all trying to do. And that means I think we're going in the right direction. And so that's the work that we do. I do want to add one more thing, which is, besides making math and science accessible around the world in different contexts, low resource contexts, but also well-resourced classrooms that still have students who struggle with abstract concepts, the other thing that we do is focus on inclusive design. And so we think about, well, how would we teach about the forces of gravity to a student who is visually impaired? Or how would a student interact with a simulation if they don't have the fine motor skills to work with a mouse? So a lot of our simulations are also developed specifically to support students with learning differences and disabilities.
Thank you very much. So one of the themes, we live in very digitally disruptive and transformative times. As Andrew Maynard sort of indicated this morning, it's going to get crazier, right? So one of the essays that I'd read a while back, which was called The Reductive Seduction of Other People's Problems, which is that I can sit here and I can say, oh, I can solve this problem of education in Ghana, right? Or somebody in Ghana can say, oh, I can solve the gun problem in the USA. That's because we are far enough away from a context, it looks very simplistic to us. And technology often becomes the crutch, which we say we are going to use technology to fix other children's problems, right? So I always wonder, whenever I hear a technological innovation, the first question I ask is, would you send your child there, right? And if you wouldn't, then why are you demanding it of other people's children, right? So in your experience, how do we guard against this tendency to oversimplify the problems we are trying to solve with technology in education? That technology has a role is absolutely obvious, we know that. And how do we ensure we're truly grappling with the complexity of the context we work in? I think both of you have your work and the scale of it speaks to that. So I'm going to alternate this time, have you, Rebecca, go first.
Great.
If that's okay?
Yeah, sure,
All
sure.
right, thank you.
So I know that I think it's been hinted at or inferred quite a bit today, but I haven't quite heard the words like participatory research. That's something that I think is really, really critical. This idea of getting into the places where the problem exists, right? And understanding various perspectives on that problem or that challenge, and ultimately finding solutions, because there's always going to be some kind of a solution hidden there that may just not yet have been generalized. So I'll just give a quick example. My daughter goes to our parish school, and they have this phenomenal day called Walk in Our Shoes, where they invite the community members, the parents of the children, who probably have complaints and concerns like all parents would, right, about any school system. And the principal invites the teachers, those parents, to come in and just teach for one class period once a year. And I tell you, it's a wonderful experience. I did it and I loved it because, again, I was a former teacher. It was middle school though, so it was a totally different beast than what I was used to. But there's nothing that compares to lived experience and sharing in the lived experience of somebody who is experiencing that challenge. So yeah, that's really what I advocate for, is participatory research, making sure that we are actually drawing from the experience and the experiencers and not just imposing our own ideas or our own agendas.
Thank you. Marwa?
So I do agree that sometimes we perceive technology as an easy fix for overcomplicated challenges, which shouldn't be actually the case. So I think to guard ourselves from this oversimplification based on our experience with Can't Wait to Learn, we would have to take 3 key points into account. One, deep understanding of the context where we are working in and co-creating the solutions with the participants in this community. 2, that would be evidence, and 3, iteration. Coming back to point 1, so we need to understand the context in terms of what systematic challenges are there, what do we need to take into account. When it comes to education and to foundational reading and math, for instance, we need to check, is it educational technology that is a priority, for instance, in this government? I'll take the example of Uganda, which is what we did. In Uganda now, there is, in the policy, educational technology is one of the top priorities, given the literacy gap that's in the country. So we need to look at what's already there, what are the priorities. We need to look at the infrastructure. We think that maybe technology is the solution, but maybe not if there's no infrastructure for that, how we can do the implementation. We need to look at the participants themselves, the needs of the teachers, the needs of children, the needs of the community, to co-create the solution together. With Can't Wait to Learn, this is what we did. The game is co-created with the children. They are the ones who chose the characters that you see in the game. They are the one who chose the game world, which I invite you after we finish to come and check. When you see the game, you know what am I talking about. Teachers participated in that, and community actors were the ones to help us with the design of the game. We used the offline functionality to make sure that it serves our aim, which is reaching and accessing the hardest to reach. When it comes to evidence, that's of course crucial, especially when working. I mean, we need to know, is this working or not? And to be able to scale, especially with governments, you need to have the evidence around that, whether it's impact studies or whether it's optimization studies showing what's working best. And finally, with the iteration, based on this data that comes in, this should address the issue and should help us to do the needed adaptations and changes. I'll give one more example and stop. That would be on the context of Lebanon. One Can't Wait to Learn started, for instance, in Lebanon. It used to be a standalone program replacing basic literacy and numeracy. It was through the feedback that has come from children and from teachers that we changed it to blended learning. So it's now, it complements education as usual, and the teacher has a more of a role in the classroom rather than being just a guide. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And what I'm hearing here is a context, evidence, iteration. I love that sequence. I love the idea of the participatory design as well. But I think something you said, and I think both of you actually alluded to, and you know, when the pandemic started, a few colleagues of mine, we started this webinar series called Silver Lining for Learning, and we were talking with lots of schools and school districts and organizations who had addressed the pandemic better than maybe others. And one thing that was common to almost all of them was that they always focused on the last learner. Just like you said, the ones who are differently able, the ones who are the most difficult to reach, that if you start with that, you actually end up supporting everybody. And I thought that was very, very good. But coming to, so the first one was about context. You sort of set me up for the next question here, right? So the question about evaluating the impact and evidence for your work. And one of my friends, Anurag Bihar, he heads the Azim Premji Foundation in India, and they do some excellent work there. And at one point we were talking about the use of data, and he spends a lot of time going from site to site where the foundation works. And he said very often the need for data is a function of distance from the work. That the further you are from the work, the more you want numbers in order to prove that it is working. And so I'm just throwing that quote out there. So how do you think about the role of data and evidence? Because it's not just proving for yourself, it is also maybe to funders or to Yidan and say, hey, you're doing good work, support us, right? So how do you think of data and evidence in this work? And what are the sort of differences or strengths and limitations of different kinds of evidence that you guys have been struggling with? So Marwa, maybe start with you this time.
Yeah. Of course, evidence and data are critical and much needed. Again, we need to tell through evidence and data if the solution is working or not. However, I think this shouldn't overshadow the reality of the communities, of children and educators most importantly. So maybe it's balancing and marrying both evidence and the implementation side of the solutions. For instance, in WordChild, this is what we try to do. And this evidence helps us in understanding the program, in doing the iterations, and then in advocating for that. So we needed first the quantitative data, for instance, the RCT, the impact studies to prove that this program is working, and also to use it for with the ministries of education and with the partners to be able to scale and to ensure that this is a sustainable solution. But also we needed, for instance, qualitative data, and this addresses the second point that you asked about Punya, because it complements also the quantitative data. So also we need to hear more from, this is where the realities come from children, from teachers, from the communities about their interaction with the solution, about the implementation. And actually at many points, this led us to do iterations to the game, to do some changes, to do some updates based on these interactions and the feedback that has come from this community. I'm missing a point.
No, I think the strengths and limitations of each, which I think you have sort of covered. It's okay. We'll come back.
Great. I love this question because it's actually something that I think I've struggled with a little bit, and I'll explain why. So PhET can be used very flexibly. It can be used by a teacher to do a demonstration and have students start a conversation about what they think will happen when, a function changes or when you add a light bulb to a circuit. But it can also be used as a proper lab in the sense of, students work in small groups, collect some data, find out the relationships between different variables. It can also be an assignment that a teacher sends home and says, just play with it and come back tomorrow with 3 things you noticed and we're going to talk about it. It could be used as an evaluation. So it's not a curriculum. It is definitely a supplemental kind of a tool, but that means it can be used with lots of different strategies in lots of different ways for different amounts of time at different grade levels for different objectives. That is hard to measure. It is really hard to measure that impact. So we don't have an RCT. We'd love to have one. We are looking for funding for one because we know that that's powerful and important. But what we do have is crowdsourced research on multiple levels. And so when it comes, for example, to just designing the simulations, we start with what does the discipline-based research say are common student learning difficulties. And that's how we decide what we create simulations about. We don't just create simulations to cover the spectrum of possible, topics in the curriculum. We're very intentional about what we're choosing and what challenge we're trying to solve. So we start with that. The next thing we do is we work with students and teachers throughout the design process, typically 6 or 7 interviews, in-depth interviews, as students and teachers interact with these simulations to find out, are the simulations helping students to learn? So on a micro scale, we know that they're effective. At a macro scale, there have been over 14,000 studies that have used PhET simulations in very specific contexts. And there have been, of course, a couple recent meta-analyses and then also a number of literature reviews that all seem to be saying the same thing, which is that it is effective when it's used to teach certain concepts. It improves students' affect, so their interest, helps to close gender gaps in many cases. And the thing that I think is most powerful is we find that the classroom dynamics change. So we see students asking more questions, teachers talking less, being more of that guide on the side. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is it's been a little difficult for me because all of this research is coming from different places. And so when somebody asks me about the effectiveness, it's not a straightforward answer. And I really hope that they can appreciate the complexity of education. But we do want an RCT, so.
Right. So if you're here with deep pockets, here we go. That actually sets up for the next question, which is a critical part of the role, the work that you do and your organizations do is communication. It's communicate with researchers, communicate with policymakers, communicate with government to allow you to do the kinds of work that you want to do. And sometimes it's about data, sometimes about storytelling. So there's a variety of different ways in this communication plays out. So can you talk a little bit about how you tailor your communication for different audiences? You're telling the same thing, but it somehow has to be customized. And how does that play out in your work? Either of you can start.
Sorry, you want to
Okay, doesn't matter. So I guess I would say the most powerful thing, of course, is the stories, starting with the stories, but stories that hit home. That's really powerful. So if I'm talking to a minister of education in Kenya, I'm going to find one of my many exemplary teachers who use PhET in Kenya and ask them to talk because they're the ones who have the direct experience. They're the ones who understand the context and can speak the same language as that policymaker. And I try to take a little bit more of a back seat and give them the content to play with, but it's the teachers who have the experience and their students, frankly, and why not hear it from the source?
Well, I do agree. To me, at least, a story would tell the best about the experience. And we've seen that in the video that was displayed when we kicked off this panel. When you hear it from children themselves and you see the impact of that, that's the most amazing things. But unfortunately, it doesn't work just like that. So, for instance, with the ministries of education, we need to show the impact of these solutions, but also also how scalable these solutions are and how sustainable can they be and how cost effective also they are, so that there's a willingness to adopt them. That's what we did, for instance, in Uganda after doing the RCT. I'm referring to Uganda, but this has been the case also in many other countries. I would have mentioned Ukraine, but the research is undergoing still. Anyhow, back to Uganda. So after doing the RCT, showing that there has been significant improvement in children's learning outcomes in reading and math, then we could do a pilot for the adoption with the government in Isingiro district in southwest Uganda. And now the schools are run by the government, and Can't Wait to Learn is implemented by the government, and it will be sustained for the future, and we're looking at even expanding it after learning from this adoption study. But if we're using this evidence with teachers, for instance, it's of course something different. It has to be actionable. If we're showing them data, we need to tell them what does this data mean and how can they use it. When speaking to donors, I know there are also donors with us in the room. It has to be a combination of all. It has to be the evidence that you are showing, and it has to be also the stories that are told by the participants, because also at the end, this matters a lot.
Thank you very much. That was very, very insightful. So I'm going to change tack a little bit here. So one of the things with technology in particular is that it tends to surprise you. You know, intended effects may or may not happen. Other kinds of unintended positive or negative may happen. And I'm wondering if you have any examples or stories to share, given stories are so powerful, where technology had some kind of a consequence that you were not expecting, both positive or negative. And what did you learn from this, and how did it shape your work going forward? Maybe start with you, Marwa?
Well, I will start with something which, when we started Can't Wait to Learn, we aimed at supporting facilitators and teachers as well. Because if we think, for instance, of a classroom of 60 children, I will use the same example that I gave about Isingiro, where there are 60 children in one classroom. Sometimes the teachers are not well capacitated and they need to cater for those 60 children. We thought that that's this educational technology solution would be supporting teachers. However, when we first started, it turned out that it was a bit of a burden to the teachers, because it's something new to them. There was the things around charging the tablets, making sure that children commit to the dedicated time and so on. So that's when we had to do a lot more of work around it, whether through sensitization or the capacity building, to get the teachers to get used to the use of Can't Wait to Learn in their classrooms. But later on, it was super helpful for them, because they could divide, for instance, this classroom that has 60 children, 30 playing Can't Wait to Learn, 30 having education as usual, and then they switched, so it helped them to give more attention and focus to do differentiated learning. One more example, which was also not unintentional, but we didn't know that it would go this well. So it comes around the participation and engagement of girls, of females. In Lebanon, we had some camps, informal tented settlements in North Lebanon, Akkar area, and in Bekaa, where some girls are not allowed to leave the informal tented settlements to go to the community centers and to be enrolled in education programs. The fact that the tablets were brought to their tented settlements, it allowed them to be enrolled in Can't Wait to Learn, basically to finish this basic literacy and numeracy program and then get bridged to formal education.
Thank you.
Yeah, those are some really powerful examples. I'm not sure if I can quite match those. In part because PhET has been around for over 20 years now, and so I don't want to say there haven't been any surprises, but we've become, I think, pretty consistent and clear with our design processes to know what we're getting ourselves into. I mean, I think the thing for me that has maybe been surprising is there are some technologies that are easy for teachers to pick up regardless of their pedagogical practices. And that includes traditional teachers. And then there are some that are much, much harder. It's just a much bigger learning curve. You have to convince people. And I think the thing that I really like about PhET is that you don't even have to teach people a new pedagogy as a first step. You just give them the technology. And like I mentioned, the classroom dynamics shift. And it sometimes surprises that quote unquote traditional teacher that students are the ones now asking questions. And the students have a lot more agency. They can explore things without their teacher's permission. They can set circuits on fire and, you know, things that they wouldn't be able to do traditionally in a typical laboratory. So that's kind of, I think, probably one of the more surprising things about PhET for teachers who might be perceived as resistant to a lot of other changes. I will say there's also there's possible negative outcomes that I've seen from technology more broadly. I'll just share an experience I had last year. I was in a situation where I was in a classroom. I think it was a summer school was going on. And I observed one class come in and they all had, I think it was online learning. And online learning can be phenomenal, but the classroom was just so quiet. None of the kids were talking to anybody else. There was very, very little collaboration. And so it was like they were all there together synchronously, all working online, but nobody was talking to each other. And I felt so uncomfortable because as a teacher, I want to hear noise. I want to hear, you know, joy, right? So I think one just has to be very careful about when we engage students. And there are times to be personally so, you know, so like in awe of something that's happening that you're not in communication with other people. But I suspect that it was something that was kind of a daily practice. And, you know, that's not the future of education that I want. You know, if there's a highly qualified teacher in the classroom, right? So.
Thank you. And, you know, both of you spoke to this, and I think, Rebecca, you said classroom, you could see the classroom dynamic shift, and you talked about, you know, the sort of the hybrid version that teachers came up with. So we are in a college of education, we prepare the next generation of teachers. How do you see the role of the educator evolving in response to these new technologies? In particular, you know, if you think about AI and things that way, and what are some mindsets for teachers in these environments that you have learned actually help them utilize them for the best possible way? Rebecca?
So I would say I think the most important thing for all teachers is to have pedagogical prudence and to recognize the agency, the authority that they should have in the classroom to make decisions about what is best for the children. And knowing when to say yes to technology, but especially knowing when to say no to it. Because there's a time and there's a place, and it all needs to be intentional and, you know, not just for technology's sake and to get another digital badge or, you know, just for the sake of getting it. I think it's really critical for teachers to know what they're doing, why they're doing, and what tools can actually be helpful for students.
In total agreement with you, Rebecca. So as a teacher, and also thinking of all the teachers and educators we interact with, the teacher's role should be always there and never replaced by technology. So technology is here to serve education and not the other way around. It's more just about seeing it as an enabler rather than a replacement for the teachers and making the best use out of it. So when giving the example of the class that has 60 children or some areas where there's no access to quality education, how can we utilize this technology? Or for instance, during COVID, where Can't Wait to Learn has already started in 2012, it was just that, okay, let's use the content that we have from the games, let's use these instructional videos, let's use whatever content is useful and that's already aligned to children's curriculum and put it in their hands to ensure that they have access to education. But even during that times, teachers were the ones to interact with the children through WhatsApp groups, ensuring the duration that children are spending, any questions that children had, and also let's not forget about the psychological aspect and the social and emotional aspect about this interaction that happens between children and the teacher. We all had maybe a good teacher in our life that left an impact, and a teacher that left maybe a negative impact. I do have that. I don't have a good relationship with numbers because of an experience that I had with one of my math teachers, and literally it still chases me until now. So this relationship, this human element between teachers and children should always be there, and it makes a huge difference.
So that brings me to Andrew Maynard. If I could channel him with a British accent, I would do so. It would make me sound a lot more credible. That's what British accents do. Actually, AI changed my accent. I don't know if you know this. I had some audio system, and it made me sound vaguely British, which my kids said, like, now you sound more authoritative. So, so that there. But, what Andrew talked about today about how these AI systems might become being more and more intelligent and being able to do this sort of knowledge tasks, and combined with the fact that there are corporate interests which want to push these technologies, maybe in ways that these technologies are not capable of, but are hyped to be capable of. I wonder how you see, how do you think about those risks and potentials as we are going forward? So I'm asking you to take a little bit of a leap, into thinking about the future, where you see these sort of pressures and also these changes in technologies that are happening. What are some things that we should be mindful of? Because it's one thing, I agree, all of us would all agree that yes, there should be a human there, the teacher is, that connection is important. But I also see lots of pressures on saying that to become more efficient or cheaper or whatever the case may be, that it's better than the existing system. There are these arguments that are being made. How do you think about that, and how do you think that we should be responding to that as a group of educators?
All right, I think I have two responses to this. The first one I would say is we should keep in mind that AI does not always need to be student facing when we're talking about AI in education. And what I mean by that is because PhET, for example, is so focused on accessibility, and that means accessibility in places where there's no internet and limited, electricity, for example, or individuals cannot don't have a lot of data, right, in order to download things and all that. Active AI, like AI that's directly in contact with the student user, is kind of, it's not currently on the table for those contexts, but we are interested in looking at how AI can improve the technology that we're creating and accelerate it. Specifically, like I mentioned at the beginning, we're trying to make our simulations accessible to students who have visual impairments. That is no simple task. And one of the solutions is to have this interactive description that as you change something in the simulation, it reads out what is actually happening. So it's it's audially based, I guess. Now, that takes an incredible amount of human input to describe all these possible scenarios, to think about how can we break up English sentence structure and use different pieces to make sense of all these different possibilities. Now try to do that in Spanish. Use a different language, or German or Hebrew, like whatever language we're talking about that has a completely different syntax. That is a hard job, and it's not just a matter of popping it into Google Translate. So how can AI do that work for us, and how can it build it into the simulations and do the programming for us as well? So we're already a lot of programmers, and I think AI, one of the most positive, immediate benefits that we've seen is in programming and software development. And in those cases, you don't have as much of that bias issue. So I hope I'm not speaking from naivete here, but so I think that is extremely promising. The second point, I think I may have forgotten, other than to say that I'm really excited about the possibility of AI as a Socratic tutor. I don't want to say tutor. I don't know. I'm not sure if I want to say tutor or not, but as a Socratic agent that's co-learning with students. But I will say that is super tricky, especially in something like the sciences and mathematics, which require extreme precision of language and need to know in depth the nuanced context of what the student already knows, what their interests are, what their preconceptions are. It is, but I would love to see development in that direction.
Thank you. Marwa?
Well, I think that among the risks that I'd fear the most is equity. making sure that, again, we're using this technology from an equitable perspective, and we are reaching the hardest to reach. This is one. Two, we need to make sure that, again, technology is serving education. It's not the other way around. It's not that technology is driving education. It should be the other way around. And now there are many trends, technological trends, and we see many programs, especially after COVID hit. We've seen this rise in all these EdTech programs. So we need to make sure, again, that these EdTech programs take into account the context, take into account the participants, that the end users that will be using these EdTech solutions. And one final thought, we need to be, of course, mindful about data exposure, especially with vulnerable communities. There should be very strict policies around that, because I think that our and vulnerable communities data is really at risk of exposure, which, yeah, we don't know what's happening with this data. How is it being used?
Well, if you've had a 23andMe account, you know that your DNA now is for sale. Literally, I'm not making that up, you know. What? No, I know. I'm just saying, but that's it, right? I mean, we people who signed up for it didn't think that this thing would come to be. Here's the company declared bankruptcy, and that data is now available for anybody. And if you think about in an age and time when we can do DNA tracing and we can do, I mean, and again, as a species, we have not had a very good record of treating other people who we regarded being the other very well, right? So I do appreciate that. I'm looking at the time, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask another question and we can talk. What we would love for you is in your small groups to sort of write down a question or two, and then I'll give a little bit of time for us to ask the questions from the side to the panelists. If you need a piece of paper, I think we can just pass the mic around. Is that okay, Amanda? Okay, we'll just do that. It seems to have worked well. So you brought up the issue of equity and access, and I think with EdTech, that is truly a big issue. I mean, I see a lot of products now which were sold 4 years ago. Now they have all slapped AI on top of it, right? Everything's now AI, right? On top of it, even when we say AI, there are so many different kinds of AI. You know, intelligent tutoring systems are one kind of AI, large language models are another. Then depending on whether you are using Llama version 1.2 versus GPT-4, I have no idea, right? And so at this time of this flux and so on, how do we keep that issue of equity and access foregrounded? How do you do that in your daily work that you do, or the work that your organization does?
Even if it's going to be repetitive, but I think it's very important to keep these points in mind and to take them into account when it comes to equity. So, for instance, if we're working with unprivileged communities, we cannot put an online solution as the solution. That's why, for instance, with Can't Wait to Learn and many other programs with good quality that are currently available are available as in offline distribution, so that those children who we target can really benefit from them. Again, also the alignment with the context, with the national curriculum, when speaking of education, having children and teachers and the community participate in designing the solution. And I know that many have previously mentioned the challenges that are faced when engaging with the government. But speaking of foundational literacy and numeracy, if we want to ensure equity and that more children have access, actually we saw that it works, I won't say the best, but it works much better if that's channeled through the government. It's right that it means more challenges, it means a lot of work, but we're starting somewhere. We're never starting from scratch. We're strengthening together the response. We're looking at the needs that are there. This is how the solutions should be actually designed, looking at the needs and designing the solutions accordingly, so that we ensure that more children can have access at a cost, but also having cost effectiveness within that, quickly on that, a final thought. So when we started Can't Wait to Learn, the costs per child were much higher than the costs that we have now. We looked at the setup costs, the recurrent costs, how the implementation modalities can help with making it more cost effective. So now in Lebanon, for instance, it's available at a cost of $25, which if compared to how it started, that has been a huge decrease, while ensuring, again, the improvement, the significant improvement in the learning outcomes. So all of these elements actually contribute to the equity.
Thank you. Rebecca?
I guess 3 points from me. I would say we think about equity in terms of people. So who are we involving in the design and our communities, right? The second part is the products or the things that we create. So how are we, again, who are we involving in the design, but ultimately what are we designing? What are we creating? And then finally is the processes. And I just want to touch on that a little bit more, which is we know that we're creating simulations that are pretty effective when used in the classroom, but even good tools can be used poorly. And so one of the things that we do is, in addition to saying, here's a tool and it will naturally help your classroom to, become more active or interactive, we do also support teachers in learning specific strategies. And also we identify teachers who are doing incredible things and we learn from them. What are they doing in the classroom? How are they using these tools? How are they making place-based connections? How are they making connections to to their local communities and to issues that matter to them? So it's not just about the technology when it comes to the equity. I did want to say one other thing, which maybe I didn't. We are an open source project. So from our code base, that's all entirely open source, and we support others to create interactive simulations of their own. Through something called Scenery Stack in our community there. And all of our simulations are free from the web and fully downloadable. So I would encourage you, I think as Marwa did, please do check out our table and come talk to us afterwards. You can play with some simulations and just Google PhET. PhET used to stand for Physics, Education, Technology, but we do math and science across the board. So that's it.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Please raise your hand and people will come running to you.
Hello. Thank you. I know it's kind of late in the day, but the technology piece is always the most exciting to hear. Really excited about the sort of intervention that you're putting in place, especially with the war child elements too. Just wondering how you are addressing, especially in some contexts, the digital literacy piece. To your point around technologies always being sort of added in some spaces, there tends to not necessarily be a thought process around the digital literacy level of the facilitator, the instructor, the teacher, as well as the students. So just wanted to hear how you've kind of navigated those things and what you're seeing as key critical skills that are necessary to ensure that they can leverage the technology really, really well for their education.
Thank you. Either one?
I think that one of the most important skills now for educators to have to be able to leverage and use this technology is the mindset that's centered around actually the child-centered approach, and how they would use technology in order to enable better learning process and not just see it as a replacement. And by the way, in many contexts, even teachers could benefit from the games themselves. They reported, and we have that as qualitative data, not quantitative data yet, that they themselves gained better learnings when it comes to reading and numeracy, which they were able also to channel to their students, to children.
We'll take one more question. I think, Amanda, please.
For Rebecca, you said you worked in Kenya with people who don't even have electricity. How would you do a simple mechanics simulation with in a situation like that?
So a lot of our work, particularly for reaching these very far off and remote communities, is through our teacher fellowship program, which we were able to run thanks to the Yidan Prize for a number of years. I think it wasn't specifically in, I don't know if it was specifically in Kenya, but we basically have teachers who end up working with foundations. The schools are often off the grid and they have solar panels and they have limited electricity. But a lot of simulations, honestly, in very, very low resource contexts, you'll find the students will bring a phone to school. The teacher will pass around their phone or their one tablet and do a station kind of an experience, or use a micro projector and project it for the entire class, off of battery power. So it's amazing. I mean, during COVID, people, because our files, we keep them so small, people are able to even SMS message these simulations. And so as long as a student can receive a text message, they can receive a simulation. And that can be extremely powerful in these situations where you may have literally no other resources.
And then to follow up on that, you would use this, I think I read that research shows that a simulation should be done before an actual hands-on lab. So I could imagine in Kenya that the physics teacher could have a low cost, equipment ready for the kids, and then do the simulation first and then do the lab experiment. Would that be the way that you would teach them?
So PhET simulations can be used in all different kinds of ways for certain. And so it really depends on where you are in the learning trajectory. But
I'm thinking of high school physics in Kenya, because I support a Kenyan man,
Oh, we can certainly follow up about with more details.
All right, thank you. I just really love that story, both of you. When it comes to story, that there are so many that you can text a simulation. I mean, when you're thinking about, you talked about COVID and WhatsApp, and I think, to me, that's always been a critical part of what teachers bring to the table, is they bring that sort of contextual ingenuity. In India, we have a word called jugaad. In Hindi, the word is called jugaad, and it's like situational creativity. And I think that's something that educators bring to the work that they do. And it might look incredibly disadvantaged and difficult, but then they make that magic happen. And so thank you. Thank you for that question, because I think it led to this sort of thought. We are getting close to the end time here. So one last question for both of you. If you had to give one piece of advice to all of us who are involved in this work, either in technology or otherwise, what would that be? And a book or a piece of media or something, or a podcast that you would like us, that would be helpful for us to think about these issues. So I'm going to start with you, Marwa, and go from there.
What I say, I kept on saying. But as a final thought, again, technology shouldn't drive education. It's the other way around. And let's always keep in mind the end users, their realities. And I would emphasize more the idea of children. We were at the CIES event before coming here to Arizona, and also in many other conferences. It makes me a bit sad when we speak generally and strategically and bring up topics including educational technology and so on, without mentioning children and teachers, who should be always the first ones to be brought up and to speak about. And maybe as a recommendation, there's, in relation to what we're discussing, so there's this book called The Missing Voices in EdTech by Reverend Davis. It emphasizes the importance of inclusion, the importance of contextualization when designing EdTech solutions. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you. Rebecca?
I'll start with my book recommendation. I don't know if it's controversial or not, but I read Anti-Fragile. Have any of you read that before? Yes? I don't remember the author's name, but I thought it was quite an interesting and provocative book to think about how do we build systems that don't just collapse under stress, but actually get stronger. And I think that's the kind of schooling system that I want, is that. And so the question is, how do we come out of this even stronger than we were before? The second question, in terms of advice, I would just say, find your excellent teachers, support them, trust them, let them do their job, because their job for them is their mission, and they know what they're doing, and you know, we've got to trust them.
All right. With that, we come to the end of this session. Thank you so much, Marwa and Rebecca, for joining us. Thank you. And thank you all for being here, being a wonderful audience. Betty, do I hand it over to you?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks again to this panel and to all of our panels today. I think it was an amazing day. Learned so much. Thank you. Just wanted to wrap up with a few reminders about tomorrow. So tomorrow morning, we're starting breakfast at 7:30. The actual session starts at 8:30 in a different venue. So check your schedule. We'll be at the Walton School for, I forget. What? For planetary sustainability. Sorry, my brain is fried. But for planetary health. So I was close. Yeah, so different venue, but I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Let's see, any other reminders? Tomorrow we have a half day. So at the end of the day, we'll provide you with lunch. But again, we'll start with breakfast at 7:30. And I think that's it. So again, thank you all for staying through the day. Anything else? Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it is a bit of a walk from the Omni to the session tomorrow. So there are Waymos and Ubers if you need transportation. I will assure you, though, it'll still be pretty cool at that time of day. So if you like to walk, it's not an unpleasant walk across campus. So.
And if we could get any of the speakers and panelists to come up on the stage, we'd just like to take a group photo before the end of the day. So any of our speakers and panelists, if you're still around here, we'd love to take a group photo. Mickey, get up here. We're looking at you. And Carol, Avetta, Marwa, Rebecca, thank you. And thank you guys so much.
And thanks to the team again. You can see this was a team effort.